This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Stone Zone. This just in, President Trump's White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt announced that President Trump has been diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, a blood circulation issue, after noticing a mild swelling in his lower legs. She put out a statement saying, in recent weeks, President Trump noted mild swelling in his lower legs in keeping with routine medical care, and out of an abundance of caution, this concern was thoroughly evaluated by the White House medical unit. The president underwent a comprehensive examination, including diagnostic vascular studies, bilateral lower extremity, venous Doppler ultrasounds were performed and revealed chronic venous insufficiency, a very common condition, particularly in individuals over the age of 70. However, she added, there was no evidence of deep vein thrombosis or arterial disease. An echocardiogram also performed confirmed normal cardiac structure and function. No signs of heart failure, renal impairment, or systemic illnesses were identified. The president is, of course, 79. He has the stamina of a bull. He's not known for his healthy diet, but he is known for his boundless energy. I knew both of his parents. I knew them well. They were both active into their mid-90s. This is what comes from being a good, solid stock. Meanwhile, a new poll has been released in the New York City mayor's race. This poll by Kaplan Associates, a well-known and respected pollster, and it has some very, very interesting numbers. Among them is a measure of the unfavorable rating of each one of the candidates. I found this fascinating. It is interesting, before we get to the ballot, to note that the unfavorable rating for Zoran Mamdani, who I refer to as the Ayatollah, the Marxist candidate for mayor, the surprise winner of the Democrat primary, you know, the guy who wants to defund the police and do away with cash bail, the guy who says we need to raise taxes on white people. He said it, I didn't. The guy who wants to give away everything for free, but close down the grocery store so we can have a food commune, although you'll have to have a special card, I suspect, with your social credit score if you want to buy food. His unfavorable rating was, among all New York voters, a sample of 1,000 voters, 32%. The unfavorable rating for current Mayor Eric Adams, a whopping 68% unfavorable, seriously underwater. The unfavorable rating for Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa was 41, which is the same as Mamdani's, interestingly enough. And the unfavorable rating for Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced former governor, 57, problematic in terms of this race. The ballot is fascinating. It is the Ayatollah, Democrat Zoran Mamdani, 42%. Independent Andrew Cuomo, the former Democrat governor, son of Mario Cuomo, a legendary New York governor, 23%. Republican Curtis Sliwa, 17%, and bringing up fourth place, running dead last, Independent Eric Adams. When you study this kind of survey research, you look at the unfavorable rating and see where there is room to grow. Now, in the ballot, that only left 5% undecided, which is much lower than I would have thought, much lower than other surveys. But this is the second survey that we have seen in recent days that had this order. The Harris poll, which is actually called the Harris X poll, had the Ayatollah Mamdani at 26, had Curtis Sliwa at 22, had Andrew Cuomo at 23, and again, Eric Adams bringing up the rear at 13. So if anybody should get out of this race, with all due respect, it is the current mayor, Eric Adams, who I think is so damaged by the accurate stories about the epic corruption of his administration that he is not viable. I continue to be surprised by those who try to argue that he was targeted for prosecution because he bucked the open borders policy of Joe Biden, when that is completely untrue. Eric Adams ran for mayor of New York City as a full-throated advocate for New York City being a sanctuary city. He put dangerous illegal immigrants into $500 a night hotels, luxury hotels. He located shelters for illegal immigrants in stable working-class neighborhoods. And these numbers, the whopping 68% unfavorable rating reflected in the Kaplan poll, is a direct reflection of that. Meanwhile, pencil neck Adam Schiff, you know him, the guy who was a congressman, said he had seen more than circumstantial evidence of Russian collusion with Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, and then produced nothing of the kind. He's been busted. He says that the problem is that Trump objects to him owning two homes. No, Trump objects to the fact that he declared both his home in California and his home in Maryland to be his principal legal residence, getting a lower mortgage rate on both. That is, by the way, a crime. And the director of housing, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Bill Pulte, has referred that mortgage fraud crime to the Justice Department for prosecution. Pencil neck has had little to say. He keeps trying to deflect, saying, what is Donald Trump trying to cover up in the Epstein investigation? My question is, what is Adam Schiff trying to cover up in the Standard Hotel investigation? This guy is the most congenital liar to ever sit in Congress. And that's a tough contest when you've got guys like Jamie Raskin and Dan Goldman, the trust fund baby, competing for the position of biggest liar in Congress. But it's tough to beat Adam Schiff, as we say. If it's Schiff with an F, flush it. So you're tuned into the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. We're hitting all the hot political topics. We're going to talk a little bit about Epstein, but I'm kind of tired of the panicans who just want to talk about Epstein when the United States of America had a surplus in June for the first time in decades, proving the president's tariff plan is working. At the same time, we have record low inflation, and the unemployment numbers are quite promising. So it's time for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates on the American people. We'll talk about that when we come back into the zone. Whatever you do, please don't touch that dial.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Stone Zone. As I said this weekend at the Turning Point USA Student Summit in Tampa, Florida, 7,000 rabid, pro-freedom, pro-constitution, pro-liberty college students. Was an incredible event. The president should clear the air on this question of Jeffrey Epstein, but I now, listening very carefully what the president is saying, and going back to something that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel said weeks ago, the relevant documents, the sealed grand jury testimony under which Jeffrey Epstein was charged by the Trump administration for child sex trafficking and conspiracy to engage in child sex trafficking in the Southern District of New York, have been under the control of rabid anti-Trump federal prosecutors. So could those documents have been spiked with a poison pill? Did they plant disinformation there, say the testimony of a Jane Doe against Donald Trump? I've written a book on this, The Clintons' War on Women, the longest chapter in the book, Orgy Island. I can tell you Donald Trump cut Jeffrey Epstein off prior to Epstein being exposed and charged with sex crimes in Florida, banned him from all of his properties and from his life. Now, compare that to the Clintons, who accepted a $25,000 donation for Epstein after he was indicted, but before he ended up in a plea deal and a slap on the wrist in those Florida charges. Yes, we acknowledge that President Trump was on Epstein's plane, along with his wife, Marla Maples, at the time. They were both at my wedding when my wife and I got married. They were engaged at that time, but also their daughter, Tiffany Trump, was on that flight along with a nanny. It flew from Teterboro in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, to Palm Beach on a Friday, returning on a Sunday. Donald Trump was never on the island. He was never, unlike Steve Bannon, he was never in Epstein's New York home. He was never in his Paris apartment, another place that Bannon visited the pedophile. So we do know that Bill Clinton was on the Lolita Express, Epstein's plane, 26 times. We also know that Ghislaine Maxwell, who's essentially Epstein's pimp, who was also charged, currently in prison for child sex trafficking, yet no co-conspirators are named. That's very strange. She headed a non-profit called Terra Mar, which was allegedly an environmental organization. In fact, it was a grooming pool for young women, and that was completely and totally financed by the Clinton Global Initiative. So I now understand what the president is saying. Here's the simplest and easiest way to resolve this, and that is I think the president should direct the attorney general to direct the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York to make a motion in federal court to release the grand jury testimony and the search warrants, which are currently sealed, of the 2019 indictment of Jeffrey Epstein. You cannot indict somebody for conspiracy without having other conspirators. I think that is the easiest way to clear the air. But at the same time, I do not trust the deep staters. People who will make up the Russian collusion hoax, people who will lie about the safety and effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccination, people who will claim that Hunter Biden's laptop contents were Russian disinformation. These people will lie about anything, and they are twisted in their hatred for President Donald Trump. Coming up with us shortly is Garrett Ziegler. He's with the Marco Polo organization. They have published all of Hunter Biden's laptop material. They've annotated it so you can actually understand it, but they haven't changed it. It is a faithful copy. We're going to tell you where you can get it. This has been a huge project, but it's a mission to expose corruption and blackmail. It is, I think, exciting work that Garrett Ziegler has done. We're going to talk about that coming up. In the meantime, a Florida Congresswoman, Congresswoman Maria Salazar, has come up with an illegal immigrant amnesty plan that flies directly in the face of President Trump's America First agenda. Salazar, a very rare liberal Republican, often at odds with the president, inferred that it was shameful for the Trump administration to enact its mandate by the American people for mass deportations. She also gave a Spanish-language version of the press conference in a cringeworthy move reminiscent of the dismal pre-Trump Republican Party. It does not appear that Congresswoman Salazar's bill will gain any traction in the House. This is basically just virtue signaling, a stunt that's being done by a self-serving politician who's very far out of step with the MAGA base in the country, as well as out of step with the American people. It's time to protect American workers, boost the wages of Americans in the workforce, and crack down like never before on illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, the Gallup poll shows that Americans are rejecting the climate change alarmism. This was shocking to me, but a recent Gallup poll showed that Americans are rejecting the entire global warming hysteria and would not consider relocating because of fears of a change in climate. CNN data analyst Harry Enton reported in horror on the Gallup poll that only 17% of Americans believe climate change will impact their habitat. Now, in a world where Americans are being besieged by inflation, World War III perhaps being on the horizon, the threat of bioweapons like COVID-19 being imminent, artificial intelligence running amok and having biblical levels of government corruption to deal with, climate change just doesn't register on a list of concerns for the average hardworking American. Democrat incompetence and criminality is what frightens the public, not the exaggerated hoax of climate change. Interestingly enough, Nicole Shanahan she was Robert F. Kennedy's running mate while he was running as independent, has released a shocking new, what she calls her Dark Maha report, containing startling whistleblower testimony about the evils of geoengineering. That's also what we know as chemtrails. This extraordinary report from a whistleblower exposed how the federal government have slickly rebranded geoengineering in order to sidestep restrictions issued by President Trump to ban the practice. In doing so, it refused a Freedom of Information Act request from journalists to prevent the disclosure of more information. Additionally, a nonprofit distinctions such as the Simons Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and of course, the Bill Gates Foundation for Innovative Climate and Energy Resources fund additional weather modification projects. We've all seen it, particularly out there in Connecticut, where my family is. They've seen these trails in the sky. States such as Florida are now passing outright bans on this geoengineering, with one of my friends, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, leading the charge to ban the practice nationally. I think we should demand that our elected officials pass these measures as quickly as possible so these diabolical experiments can be stamped out once and for all. In the meantime, Jerome Powell, the beleaguered chairman of the Federal Reserve, continues to refuse to cut interest rates on the American people, despite the fact that inflation and unemployment, the two measures that he is supposed to use, are both lower or at the same level as they were the last three times the Federal Reserve cut interest rates. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is getting a $2.5 billion renovation of their already palatial headquarters in Washington, D.C. Powell told a Senate committee that there was no private elevator for the Fed governors, there was no private dining room, there was no new marble, no new fountains, no roof garden. That turns out to all be 100% false. At least two U.S. senators told me they are considering sending a letter of referral to the Justice Department to charge the Federal Reserve chairman with perjury and false statements before the Senate committee. This guy is playing politics with the national economy. He gets a $2.5 billion upgrade in his office, but Americans can't get a rate cut, an interest rate cut, to buy a car or a house. You're listening to Roger Stone on the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back with Garrett Ziegler.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Joining me now, Garrett Ziegler. He is the founder and chairman of Marco Polo. That is the nonprofit research organization that has published the entirety of Hunter Biden's laptop. He served as an associate director in the White House of President Donald Trump in his first term in the Office of Trade and Manufacturing. Garrett Ziegler has a degree in economics from St. Louis University. He lives in Illinois with his wife and all-American children. He is a cousin of White House Press Secretary Ron Ziegler, who was most famous for walking back one of his Watergate statements, saying that his previous statement was now inoperative, one of my all-time favorites. Garrett Ziegler, welcome back into the Stone Zone.
Thank you for having me. Yes, it's a foundation in Western law that you can't be held to account for the sins of your father. Well, I wouldn't call that a sin by Ron, but definitely something that I wouldn't say. But, hey, Ron was loyal above all, and that I really admire.
He was a very good man, and the deep state removed Richard Nixon. We now know this based on declassified documents. The Central Intelligence Agency, well aware of the plan to break into the Watergate, infiltrates the Watergate burglar team with multiple CIA operatives still on the CIA payroll, still answering to their handlers. It's a setup. It's interesting because the Watergate prosecutors and the Senate Watergate Committee both knew of the CIA's active involvement, yet they were barred from publishing a minority report. They were barred from asking any questions. Anyway, we're here to talk about today. Your nonprofit organization, 501c3, Marco Polo, has now published yet again the entirety of Hunter Biden's laptop contents. We now know definitively that this is not Russian disinformation. You can imagine how shocked I was to get a threatening letter from Hunter Biden's lawyer, Abby Lowell, considered by many to be the worst lawyer in America, the cleanup man for the deep left, even though anything I know about Hunter Biden's laptop, I read in the New York Post. I never had the laptop contents, never discussed it with Mayor Giuliani, who evidently quite legally did.
Yes.
It is an abusive process, but this is an amazing accomplishment. Folks, you can go to BidenLaptopEmails.com. That's BidenLaptopEmails.com to order a copy of the 644-page dossier on the infamous abandoned device. The great thing about this report is it's comprehensive, it's authoritative, it describes 459 violations of state and federal laws and regulations that were all on his hard drive. This is a massive project. Garrett, tell us how you did this.
Well, it was a long time in the making. It took me about 18 months. I put on 30 pounds. Thank God I've since lost that. But I spent the entirety of 2022 in my home office here writing this book, and I went through every single file, which is about 200 gigabytes. And this relaunch of our email database, where everybody listening to this, everybody in America for free, can go and look and read all 128,000 of these. We did this as sort of a public service. There are many groups on the right who have this laptop, but we're really democratizing. I know it's a left-wing word, but we're really, democratizing the data, and that's what made Abby Lowell lose his mind on us too. I agree with you. He is one of the most atrocious lawyers in America. He lies like you and I breathe. And one of the reasons why they hated us so much is because we spread this data all over the fruited plains. So we not only wrote the book, but, there's a lot of fallout over the communication strategy with the Epstein stuff. And one of the key things I keep hearing is just a lack of disclosure. I think that people could understand if in some cases the statute of limitations is barring a prosecution, but what the public hates is not being told the whole reasoning behind decisions. And so that's the motive for putting this email database together. And by relaunching, I simply mean we wrote it in a newer, better programming language, and it's quicker. And it looks really, really good. And so we have added, and we are going to add more features to this, meaning users will be able to bookmark particular emails, like 10 held by H for the big guy, that infamous email. All of Hunter's Chinese business deals wherein he got at least $7 million. That's a floor, not a ceiling. At least $7 million for no discernible worker experience. All of those emails are on this, and it's the only place in the country where you can go view it. So I'm grateful for you having me on to talk about this, because we are basically, completely shut out of the mainstream on cable TV. I mean, it's very hard for our work to get any attention on the mainstream, but there's this website out there that's completely free, completely secure, and I want everybody not to have trepidation about going to this, because we redacted genitalia and we've redacted social security numbers and credit card numbers. And if even that doesn't convince you, all your listeners should know that Hunter's ridiculous lawsuit against Marco Polo and me personally was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Hunter can never bring these ridiculous claims against us again. So there's literally no legal risk anymore, which is, a good thing to have off my back. But that's where that attack dog Abby Lowell came in. He just said things that were untrue, and the press parroted his ridiculous allegations.
So here's an important question for you, Garrett. Who has worse hair, Abby Lowell or Congressman Jamie Raskin?
Jamie Raskin. And can we talk about this for 90
sure.
seconds?
Yes,
Just because Jamie Raskin, it really is a bird in my saddle. He's one of the most despicable members of the lower chamber to ever be in the history of the United States of America. First of all, son of a huge commie. Foreign agent, degenerate novelist, Marcus Ratskin. And what I loathe about Jamie is not just his lying, but when he had cancer, which isn't his fault, I'm not making fun of him for having cancer, but when he did have cancer, it looked as if he took a black spray paint can and literally sprayed it on top of his head, meaning it's one thing to look like that Prison Mike character from The Office with a bandana on your head. I think everybody can forgive that. What they cannot forgive is a raccoon-looking figure on top of your head in which you spray paint black paint over it. But the only person I loathe more than Jamie Raskin and Abby Lowell, who dyes his hair, is Dan Goldman. Dan Goldman is, in my opinion, the most mendacious character, almost worse than Schiff. He's the worst in the House. Schiff, I think, is the worst in the Senate. Clear mortgage fraud candidate. I hope that the District of Maryland, if I were the U.S. Attorney today in the District of Maryland and I saw the FHA complaint in President Trump's True Social, I better be impaneling a grand jury. That guy ripped off the taxpayer for tens of thousands of dollars. He got a better mortgage rate. So, by the way, all these characters that I'm alluding to, Raskin and Schiff, even though they're not directly communicating with Hunter, their names are in the laptop emails. So what the goal is with this email database, which we first put up in May of 22, it's for other reporters, and there have been over 25 articles from the New York Post they've linked their stories to our database. So they'll talk about an email and then put the hyperlink to the exact email out of the 128,000 in the article, and that really makes my heart sing, because I know this story, this 200 gigabytes is bigger than just what I can go through. So it's really a repository for other researchers and writers to use in their stories. Schiff's in the emails, all these jokers are in the emails. It's one of the first peering into the American swamp ever, really, meaning there's been no, very rarely is this much primary source material going to be available to the public without redactions in their communications. Obviously, a guy on our team spent the better part of a month just covering up the genitalia of the 46th U.S. president's family. So then, by the way, I mentioned this on your program before, but one of Abby Lowell's ridiculous causes of action in his lawsuit against me is that I covered up his client's genitalia. They called it data modification because I put black boxes over his client's genitalia. So according to Abby Lowell and Hunter's other attorneys, according to their own logic, they would have preferred their client be naked in our publications. And because we're Christians, we don't distribute pornography. But it is fascinating that Winston Strawn, who's now suing Hunter, allowed their firm's name to be put on a lawsuit accusing me of data modification just because I was a gentleman to Hunter and covered up his own genitalia.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. Folks, once again, you can go to BidenLaptopEmails.com. That's Biden Laptop Emails to get your own copy and to look at this extraordinary body of work. The annotations are very helpful to help the average American understand who's who and which one of Hunter's co-conspirators was doing what. As I recall, in one of these deals, Hunter got significant equity in a Chinese energy company. What ended up happening to that stock?
Well, it's an interesting case because the U.S. lobbyist was arrested in November of 2017. His name was Patrick Ho, and he was tried and convicted, spent some time in the clink, and during his recorded prison interviews and phone calls, he was trying to get Xi Jinping's attention to help them out. So basically, once this guy named Patrick Ho got arrested, that energy company called CEFC disintegrated, and Xi Jinping arrested the main honcho, Ye Jianming, in China. So both the U.S. guy, well, he's from Hong Kong, but he spent a lot of time in the States, about 2 decades. Both Patrick Ho and the CEFC chairman were both arrested, and Patrick Ho at least is alive. The Chinese fellow, Ye Jianming, has not been heard of since 2018, and he's probably fish food at the bottom of the Yangtze. But the arrest of Patrick Ho blew that operation's cover. That energy company was trying to spread the Belt and Road Initiative in the Western world, from Latin America all the way up to the U.S., and the Bidens were going to be the U.S. representatives for this Chi-Com company. They were trying to set up meetings with Andrew Cuomo, all these folks. We actually have the dope chart that Jimmy Biden sent to Hunter of every single Politico that they were going to try to set up meetings with. And, of course, they got $7 million for no discernible work. They sent a couple of emails. And, again, it's clear money laundering. Hunter's prosecutions, especially the gun one, were stupid. That's why Hunter is so ridiculous to hate me, and his wife spit on my face and called me all these names. They don't realize that I was actually defending Hunter in his gun case because the charge was dumb. I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. I don't think that just because you use drugs, you don't get to defend your family. So Hunter was actually convicted of a stupid charge that may be overturned at SCOTUS someday, but they didn't charge him for the obvious money laundering that he was engaged in. And I'm furious at David Weiss and that whole special counsel operation. And the Congress has been ineffective, to no one's surprise, at getting to the bottom of that.
Listen, I put up with this every day. Oh, Roger Stone and his wife evaded federal taxes. No, false. We reported every penny of income and every penny of our assets, meager as they were. After they target you in a witch hunt and they bankrupt you, they then sue you because you can't pay. I now owe them a massive amount of money because I got interest and penalties, and I will probably die owing them taxes, but I have paid everything to date. All my taxes are up to date. This is like apples and oranges. Hunter Biden failed to report $10 million worth of income. That is classic.
It is astonishing. And November 7th, when November 7th went by, I know the election was on the 5th, but like by the 7th, I was already thinking of you, Roger, saying, hey, whatever entity, whether it's the Southern District of Florida, whatever, they better drop that BS on you, because remember, with Hunter's pardon, that too meant all of the fines and interest and penalties went away. So it makes me scream. It makes me furious when they're trying to fleece folks like you with interest and penalties, and then this decrepit crackhead Hunter Biden not only doesn't get to go to prison, but all of his civil liabilities get wiped out too. It is astonishing. So hopefully by the end of 29, this gets taken care of for you.
That would be nice. It is a rigged system. When we come back, I want to ask you, the House has just minutes ago passed a historic cryptocurrency legislation, sending it to the president's desk. This is indeed a massive positive for America. I want to talk about that when we get back. They have passed a regulatory framework for stable coins. This is the new economy. Great credit to Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, who's an outside-the-box libertarian thinker, staunch supporter of the president, and I think among his very best cabinet picks. We'll be right back with Garrett Ziegler. He is the founder and chairman of Marco Polo. I think it's marcopolo.org, as I recall. But go to BidenLaptopEmails.com, BidenLaptopEmails.com, and take a look, order your copy of this incredible 644-page dossier and get the truth from Marco Polo. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And you're back in the Stone Zone. We're still with Garrett Ziegler. He's the founder and chairman of Marco Polo. That's the non-profit organization that has taken upon themselves a massive project to expose corruption surrounding Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family. Garrett, let me ask you an important question. Is there, putting aside the Supreme Court's decision about immunity and the president, in a normal circumstance, has enough been uncovered so that Joe Biden, the former president, could have reasonably been prosecuted for these massive $1 million payments that seem to have made their way to him?
Totally. And even if, first of all, the Congress, one of the valuable things the Congress did do was they had the subpoena power. Obviously, we don't. And they uncovered the involvement of Joe Biden's power of attorney, an 84-year-old attorney in Delaware named Mel Monzak. He's been Joe Biden's power of attorney since 1987. And everything that Joe and Jimmy do runs through Mel's firm. And there was a check that came from Jimmy Biden to Joe for $40K, and that money came in part from the Chinese and in part from a now defunct healthcare company called AmeriCorps. The reason why this is important is because those checks occurred at a time when Joe was out of the vice presidency. Obviously, the U.S. or Trump v. U.S. SCOTUS precedent only applies to the president, not the VP. But even if we were to take an expansive view of the ruling and say that it does apply to the VP, and thus all of the 951 violations or 219 violations that Joe engaged in when he was the vice president, that CHICOM money came at a time when Joe was out of office. And the violations are very simple. They were acting as unregistered agents for a foreign principal, and that foreign principal was, like you said, CEFC, that Chinese conglomerate that was attempting to create Belt and Road infrastructure projects. And everybody can go look up U.S. v. Patrick Ho that took place right in the middle of the WABC viewership. I mean, it was at Foley Square, that trial, and obviously he was convicted. And those violations were within that period before he became president through the rigged election, and after he was vice president. So, yeah, any fair two-bit FBI special agent would see the paper trail, and they would see that the money ultimately was washed through multiple entities. It wasn't always easy to track. I will admit that. The laptop is sort of like those peepholes in doors. The laptop is like a peephole, meaning we can only see a portion of the interaction. Sometimes Hunter would say, "Hey, text me on WhatsApp." So we'd have a portion of the conversation on iMessage, but then the WhatsApp message wasn't, or the WhatsApp conversation wasn't captured. But what the feds have is the benefit of collating all of that data. And it's why people are mad about the Epstein communications fallout. It's because the feds are sitting on this trove. They're sitting on the result of the search warrant of the Manhattan townhouse, and they have all this primary source evidence. And, of course, nobody wants to see child sexual abuse material or any of the victims identified by face or whatever. But they are sitting on a trove, and I just hope that they move to unseal. Like you said, I listened to your speech intently from Florida this past weekend. That's such an easy win that the DOJ, and they, thank God, just got rid of Maureen Comey, they could do tomorrow. They could apply to have an unsealing in the SDNY for a deceased individual. I mean, it'd be one thing if Epstein were still alive. This guy's dead.
He has no rights to be violated. I totally agree. And I think that is the easiest way. Again, the president simply needs to direct his attorney general to direct the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York to move in federal court to unseal the grand jury testimony, and this is very important, and also the search warrants issued by the federal prosecutors in that jurisdiction. He was prosecuted for conspiracy to engage in child sex trafficking as well as child sex trafficking. We have to wrap it up there. Again, I want to thank my guest, Garrett Ziegler. Urge you to go to BidenLaptopEmails.com. Garrett, thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?